How did the 80s become the decade where every hit show or movie suddenly got its own cartoon and then vanished almost instantly? Studios turned sitcom stars into superheroes, movie icons, into moral teachers, and even puzzles into talking sidekicks. It was loud, colorful, and completely out of control. But somewhere between the hype and the toy commercials, most of these spin-offs disappeared without a trace. So what went wrong in the wildest animation boom television ever saw? The Dukes, 1983 to 84. When the Dukes of Hazzard ruled primetime television, CBS decided to double down with an animated version called The Dukes. It followed Bo, Luke, and Daisy racing across the globe in the General Lee, trying to win money to save their family farm, while outsmarting Boss Hogg. Sounds familiar? That's because it basically was the same plot, just with more jumps and fewer real cars. But here's the catch when production began. The live-action actors playing Bo and Luke had left the original show over a contract dispute. So their cartoon versions were replaced with Coy and Vance, the much-hated cousins from the show's temporary cast. Fans instantly tuned out. The timing couldn't have been worse. When Bo and Luke returned to the real series, the cartoon quietly swapped them back in, but the damage was already done. Ratings nosedived, the toy tie-ins didn't sell, and CBS hit the brakes after only 2 seasons. Today, The Dukes survives mostly as a YouTube curiosity, a cartoon that thought it could outrun bad timing, but couldn't even make it past the starting line. Gilligan's Planet, 1982 to 83. If you ever thought Gilligan's Island was ridiculous, wait until you hear about Gilligan's Planet. Hanna-Barbera took the castaways off their deserted island and sent them into outer space. Yes, really. The professor built a spaceship out of bamboo, it somehow worked, and everyone crash-landed on another planet. The same voice actors from the original series returned, including Bob Denver as Gilligan. The goal was to capture both nostalgia and sci-fi adventure for Saturday mornings. But what viewers got instead was a strange blend of slapstick and cosmic nonsense. Every episode revolved around Gilligan accidentally ruining another rescue attempt, just like old times, but now with aliens. The show looked cheap even by early 80s animation standards. Backgrounds were plain, movements were stiff, and the jokes recycled faster than Gilligan's fishing nets. Kids who loved Smurfs or He-Man found Gilligan's Planet painfully slow, while adults who remembered the live-action show just scratched their heads. After one short season, CBS pulled the plug. It faded from syndication almost immediately, becoming one of those "Did I dream that?" cartoons from the decade. Today, a few grainy clips floating online are all that prove it actually happened. A cosmic misfire, if there ever was one. The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, 1980 to 82. When a show about 1950s teenagers became one of the biggest hits on television, someone at ABC thought, let's add time travel. Thus, the Fonz and the Happy Days Gang was born. The idea? Fonzie, Richie, and Ralph accidentally team up with a girl from the future named Cupcake and travel through time fixing history with the help of a talking dog named Mr. Cool. It was Happy Days meets Doctor Who, if Doctor Who had been written on a sugar rush. Henry Winkler actually voiced the cartoon Fonz, which gave it some credibility, but even his cool couldn't save this show from chaos. The animation was rough, the historical jokes missed the mark, and the plots felt like they were written by someone flipping through a time travel calendar. Kids were confused. They expected jukeboxes and drag races, not Roman gladiators and cavemen. Critics called it one of the strangest rebrands of the era. Despite 2 short seasons, ABC quietly dropped it from rotation once the novelty wore off. Still, the Fonz and the Happy Days Gang is an amazing example of how far networks were willing to stretch a familiar brand. It tried to turn a greaser into a hero across time, and instead it just jumped the cartoon shark. Laverne and Shirley in the Army, 1981 to 82. Spin-offs were everywhere, and Hanna-Barbera decided that the sitcom Laverne and Shirley needed an animated twist. So they made Laverne and Shirley in the Army. The show sent the two Milwaukee friends to join the military, turning their slapstick chemistry into loud, chaotic adventures on a cartoon base. Here's the weird part. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall actually voiced their characters at first, but Williams left the project after a few episodes. The animation replaced her voice without explanation, which made the already thin humor feel even flatter. To make things zanier, the show featured a talking pig named Sergeant Squealy, because apparently no 80s cartoon was complete without a talking animal sidekick. Each episode followed the same predictable setup. Laverne and Shirley bungled an assignment, Squealy tattled to the commander, chaos followed, and everything reset by the end. Kids didn't care about sitcom nostalgia, and adults had no reason to watch. Ratings tanked, and the series was quietly canceled after just one season. Ironically, the only people who truly remember Laverne and Shirley in the Army are animation collectors who can't believe it existed. It's proof that not every live-action hit could survive the leap into Saturday morning. Sometimes even friendship and fizzy optimism can't save a bad cartoon idea. The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, 1979 to 80. Before Saturday mornings became crowded with toy-based heroes, Filmation tried to revive a couple of forgotten cartoon legends, Mighty Mouse and the mischievous magpies, Heckle and Jekyll. The result was The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse and Heckle and Jekyll, a glossy reboot that hoped to bring classic 40s characters into the neon age. Each half-hour mixed action and comedy with Mighty Mouse soaring through slapstick rescues and the magpies pulling pranks on every authority figure in sight. It looked energetic on paper, but the charm didn't translate. The humor felt trapped between generations. Too tame for older fans, too talky for kids used to the speed of Scooby-Doo and Super Friends. Filmation reused animation cells heavily, giving everything that jerky, recycled motion that defined its cheaper productions. Even the color palette, bright pinks and dull yellows, made it feel strangely dated for an era already embracing bolder, flashier styles. Viewers tuned out fast, and CBS quietly dropped the series after a single season. Still, it marked an interesting moment in animation history, a studio trying to bridge two eras and missing both. You can still find full episodes floating online, proof that not every revival lands the way it hopes. Before long, the Mouse and the Magpies flapped back into nostalgia, waiting for a second comeback that wouldn't arrive until much later in the decade. It's Punky Brewster, 1985 to 86. When the live-action Punky Brewster became a hit, NBC saw a chance to turn its scrappy heroine into a Saturday morning icon. So they launched It's Punky Brewster, a cartoon version that followed Punky, her dog Brandon, and believe it or not, a magical creature named Glomer, who lived at the end of a rainbow. Yes, the streetwise Chicago orphan suddenly had a sparkly elf friend who could grant wishes. The show mixed everyday lessons with bursts of fantasy, but it never quite figured out what it wanted to be. Sometimes it was a heartwarming kids' show about growing up. Other times it was full-on fairy tale chaos. The original cast, including Soleil Moon Frye, returned to voice their characters, which gave it charm, but even that couldn't hide how strange the new direction was. Critics called it punky with glitter glue, and fans of the sitcom didn't know what to make of it. Glomer's magic often caused more trouble than it solved, and episodes drifted between after-school morals and rainbow mayhem. The tone was just too inconsistent. After 2 brief seasons, It's Punky Brewster disappeared from NBC's lineup. Still, the fact that you can find full episodes online makes it a fascinating time capsule. It's a reminder that in the 80s, even the most grounded shows couldn't resist going full cartoon fantasy sometimes, at the cost of their own identity. The Gary Coleman Show, 1982. By the early 80s, Gary Coleman was one of television's biggest stars, thanks to Different Strokes. NBC decided to cash in on his popularity with a cartoon based on his made-for-TV movie, The Kid with the Broken Halo. The result was The Gary Coleman Show, where Coleman voiced Andy LeBeau, an apprentice angel sent back to Earth to help people earn their wings. Each episode followed a formula. Andy would descend to Earth, meet a struggling person or family, and try to fix their problems, usually with good intentions that spiraled into comic trouble. It was wholesome, even sweet, but also way too sentimental for its own good. Viewers expecting the quick wit of Arnold Jackson got moral lessons about kindness and responsibility instead. Despite Coleman's charm, the animation was bland, and the writing felt like it was trapped between a sitcom and a Sunday school cartoon. NBC gave it one season before moving on. Ironically, the live-action Different Strokes outlasted the cartoon by years. Today, The Gary Coleman Show survives mostly as a trivia footnote, a symbol of how the 80s loved to turn TV stars into animated role models. It tried to blend humor and heart, but in the end, it just felt like a celestial rerun that nobody asked for. Rambo. The Force of Freedom, 1986. Yes, you heard that right, there was a Rambo cartoon for kids, based loosely on the movie series, Rambo. The Force of Freedom turned the brooding action hero into a Saturday morning adventurer, leading a team of global heroes against cartoon villains. Every episode opened with an intense theme song, muscled heroes charging forward, and plenty of moral messages tagged on at the end. The show's creators wanted to capture the popularity of action cartoons like G.I. Joe, while softening the tone for younger audiences. But even then, it was an odd fit. The original films were gritty and serious, while the cartoon presented Rambo as a wholesome problem solver who lectured kids about teamwork after every mission. Parents were puzzled, and kids were divided. Some loved the explosions and energy, others found it preachy. Critics didn't hold back either, calling it the weirdest case of cartoon repackaging ever. Despite all that, it became a modest hit overseas, and even spawned a small line of action figures. After one season, though, Rambo, The Force of Freedom faded away as quickly as it arrived. Today it's remembered as one of those "did that really happen?" moments in TV history, a symbol of how the 80s could turn anything, even a dark movie hero, into a lesson about friendship and courage. Rubik, the Amazing Cube, 1983. If there was ever a cartoon that perfectly captured 80s marketing madness, it was Rubik, the Amazing Cube. Based on the famous puzzle toy, the show imagined Rubik as a floating talking cube with magical powers who befriends a group of Hispanic American siblings. Whenever they solved him, he came to life with a cheerful face and a glow that could fix almost any problem. Produced by Ruby Spears, the same studio behind Thundar the Barbarian, the animation was bright, colorful, and painfully cheerful. Every episode followed the same rhythm. The kids got into trouble, a mystery unfolded, and Rubik used his powers to save the day. It was pure Saturday morning sugar rush. The show's theme song, performed by the band Menudo, was incredibly catchy, and arguably the best thing about it. But the concept wore thin fast. A magical cube solving human problems didn't exactly hold long-term emotional weight, and once the Rubik's Cube craze faded, so did the audience. Still, Rubik, the Amazing Cube, deserves credit for its diversity and energy. It tried to reflect multicultural America before most cartoons did. But once toy sales cooled, the show disappeared almost overnight. Today, it's remembered mostly for its wild concept, and that unforgettable theme song echoing Rubik the Amazing Cube. The Karate Kid, the animated series, 1989. After the massive success of the Karate Kid films, it was inevitable that someone would try to bring Daniel and Mr. Miyagi to Saturday mornings. In The Karate Kid, the animated series, The duo traveled the world searching for a magical relic stolen from a temple, meeting new friends and foes along the way. It was part adventure, part mysticism, and totally disconnected from the tone of the films. Instead of focusing on karate lessons and life wisdom, the cartoon leaned heavily on globe-trotting adventure, think Indiana Jones, but with teenage karate moves. Voice actors replaced the movie stars, and while they did their best, the spirit of the original story was missing. Kids who loved the movies were confused by the cartoon's mystical artifacts and ancient legends. The heart-to-heart mentorship that defined the films was gone, replaced with chase scenes and fantasy quests. By the time viewers adjusted, CBS had already canceled it after 13 episodes. Still, the show has a strange charm in hindsight. The animation wasn't bad, and it showed how powerful the Karate Kid name had become in pop culture. But like so many 80s spin-offs, it learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the movie magic doesn't survive the jump to Saturday morning TV. Police Academy, the animated series, 1988 to 89. By the late 80s, the Police Academy movies had already gone through more sequels than anyone could count, so Warner Brothers figured, why not make it a cartoon? Police Academy. The animated series brought back the misfit cops, the sound effects genius Larval Jones, and the clumsy Mahoney for slapstick adventures that somehow managed to be even sillier than the films. The cartoon turned the police force into a comedy squad. Instead of city crime, the team faced pranksters, thieves, and the occasional robot gone rogue. It was packed with goofy gadgets, noisy chases, and enough banana peels to fill a warehouse. The show's real strength was its exaggerated animation, which made every fall and explosion look like pure chaos in motion. For younger viewers, it was a hit. For anyone expecting the original's cheeky humor, though it felt watered down and harmless. The writers swapped adult jokes for cartoon mayhem, but the characters were still recognizable enough to hook kids who loved silly chaos. Surprisingly, it lasted 2 seasons and over 60 episodes before finally being retired. Today, clips still pop up online as a reminder of how the 80s could turn even the rowdiest film into a squeaky clean cartoon. It may not have taught much about law and order, but it definitely proved that laughter can be its own kind of justice. Alf, the animated series, 1987 to 89. At the height of Alf mania, NBC decided the sarcastic alien needed his own animated prequel. Alf. The animated series took viewers back to the planet Melmac, showing Alf's life before he crash-landed on Earth. Suddenly, the wisecracking outsider became a hometown hero, surrounded by furry friends, space poodles, and endless puns. The idea was clever, expand the universe of a TV phenomenon, but the execution was uneven. Without the fish-out-of-water humor of the live-action show, Alf felt less funny and more like a typical cartoon protagonist. His sarcastic edge was softened, and his mischievous nature turned into playful goofiness. Still, the animation had its charm, and the world of Melmac was filled with bright, bizarre details, floating scooters, pastel cities, and fried food that glowed. The show even tried adding moral lessons, which felt odd for a character known for chaos. A spin-off sequel called Alf Tales reimagined fairy tales with Alf and friends in starring roles, but by then the craze had cooled. Both series ended quietly, leaving fans with a handful of colorful memories and some of the strangest merchandise of the decade. Looking back, Alf. The animated series perfectly captured the moment when every network tried to squeeze one more laugh out of their biggest hits, whether it made sense or not. The Real Ghostbusters, Slimer, and The Real Ghostbusters, 1988 to 90. After the success of The Real Ghostbusters, ABC decided to make it even more kid-friendly by rebranding the show into Slimer and The Real Ghostbusters. Suddenly, the focus shifted from the team's spooky adventures to Slimer's daily life. Yes, the green blob got his own cartoon within the cartoon. This version amped up the slapstick and toned down the scares. The first half of each episode still featured ghost hunting stories, but the second half turned into short comedic segments starring Slimer and his quirky human friends. The ghosts became less frightening and more like noisy neighbors. Kids who loved the original darker tone weren't impressed. Parents, however, appreciated the softer humor and bright candy-colored animation. Despite mixed reactions, the series continued for several seasons, though ratings dropped once it leaned too far into Looney Tunes-style gags. Even so, Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters helped cement the franchise's long-lasting appeal. It proved that even when the supernatural was turned into slapstick, fans still wanted to see the crew busting ectoplasmic troublemakers. The show ended in the early 90s, but it remains a vivid example of how networks tried to stretch every hit just a little too far and sometimes stretched it right off the screen. Back to the Future, the animated series, 1990 to 91. Even though it technically aired at the dawn of the 90s, Back to the Future, the animated series was born out of pure 80s energy. It continued the adventures of Doc Brown, Marty McFly, and the time-traveling DeLorean, but with extra chaos and science experiments gone wrong. Produced by Universal and Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment. The cartoon tried to mix science education with family comedy. Doc Brown taught kids about physics at the end of each episode, turning wild time adventures into classroom lessons. Christopher Lloyd even reprised his role in live-action segments, giving it a dash of authenticity. Despite strong production and clever writing, the show struggled to find its audience. Kids wanted more time travel excitement and less science talk, while fans of the movies missed the sharp humor and emotional heart. After 2 seasons, it quietly ended ironically, without much fanfare for a series about time. Still, it's remembered fondly for its effort to keep the Back to the Future universe alive. You can find most episodes online, complete with that unmistakable 80s optimism about technology and discovery. It may not have changed the timeline, but it definitely earned its spot in the vault of curious cartoon spin-offs. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, 1990. When Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure hit theaters in the late 80s, it became a cult favorite overnight. Naturally, the next step was an animated version. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures followed the 2 time-traveling buddies on even more excellent trips through history, meeting famous figures and causing good-natured chaos wherever they went. What made the first season special was that Keanu Reeves, Alex Winter, and George Carlin all returned to voice their characters. That gave it a genuine connection to the movie and an easygoing charm that fans loved. But when production switched studios for Season 2, the original cast left, and the replacements couldn't capture the same lightning-in-a-bottle chemistry. The humor became broader, the animation rougher, and the heart faded. Audiences dropped off almost instantly. The show was canceled after 2 seasons, leaving behind a few scattered VHS releases and fond memories among die-hard fans. Looking back, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures was the perfect example of how fast the 80s to 90s transition moved. One moment, it was totally awesome. The next, it was history. But in true Bill and Ted fashion, it still reminds us to be excellent to each other, even when your cartoon doesn't last. The 80s were fearless. Studios thought anything could become a cartoon, and for a while it seemed true sitcoms, action stars, even puzzles. Some ideas soared, most fizzled, but every one of them captured that electric optimism that defined the decade. Which of these forgotten spin-offs do you actually remember watching? Drop it in the comments below. And if you loved this nostalgia trip, hit subscribe for more lost treasures from the wildest decade in animation history.